Hi everyone, Paul Santilli here. I head up the SCIP organization, SCIP, Strategic Consortium of Intelligence Professionals, and I'm very pleased to have Lynn Neese. He's from Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. He's the Chief Technology Officer as well as an HPE Fellow for Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, joining us on our iStream podcast series. We're doing it live here at the IntelliCon event in Prague. Welcome, Lynn.
Hi, thank you, Paul.
So, what does the Chief Technology Officer for Sustainability do at HPE?
So I'm part of the services business in HPE. So we're basically the consulting arm of the company. And typically we get involved in a lot of the projects where our customers are doing large infrastructure roles in IT, right? And for me, what I'm doing is helping customers understand the sustainability implications of their IT operations, right? Everything from how do they do procurement to energy and emissions, which is a big deal for us, right?
Yeah.
It's a big part of our carbon footprint is they're using our products in electric grids that have emissions. And so I spend a lot of time helping understand how modernization projects can dramatically reduce energy and emissions.
So it's really the transition from their legacy systems, the infrastructure they have from a legacy IT standpoint, and how the modernization of that infrastructure, not only improving from a production, from a performance and cost standpoint, but from a sustainability and circular economy standpoint.
What a lot of people had no idea was a typical modernization project is going to reduce energy and emissions by 50% or more.
Oh my gosh.
It's very common.
That's tremendous.
And exactly. And so these projects have typically been justified based on OpEx for IT.
Yeah, right.
And people had no idea the energy. A new server, a brand new, Gen 11 server can host three times as many virtual machines as a 4-year-old server can.
Yeah.
So you could see how you can dramatically cut the energy and emissions. And if you rethink how your applications are architected, right, you can get dramatic improvements in energy.
Wow. So the end of life on these systems are only a few years now, considering
unfortunately, the life cycle is much shorter. And this is not a well-known fact. For a laptop or a printer, the production and the end of life are the big part of their carbon footprint. For a server in a data center, that's not the case. It's the energy consumption.
Yeah, the energy consumption. So as you say, as technology gets better, chips get smaller, more energy efficient. You magnify that by the number of chips in the system, et cetera, you get tremendous savings like that.
Yep.
So, super interesting stuff, especially with a lot of the new legislation in the US, for example, around energy consumption and reduction of CO2, and as well as the new AI even legislation that's been recently signed. If we take all of this as a composite, and look at it from, as we always say in the SCIP environment, this intelligence ecosystem standpoint. How does this play a part within this ecosystem from an intelligence standpoint, by which, how do we utilize intelligence to really drive and help your customers do this modernization and this energy reduction aspect?
Well, and I think even in general, how to address the whole carbon footprinting problem, right? Many companies, most Fortune 500 companies have some sort of target today. And about 35 to 40% of all Fortune 500 companies have a science-based target. At some point in the very near future, everybody who supplies them will have to have a target, or they won't be a supplier to those companies. So bottom line is, everybody's going to have targets. And the data is still very sketchy. There's a lot of reverse engineering that goes on. There's something called life cycle assessment, where you try to reverse engineer how something was created. Like if I want to give you the carbon footprint for this bottle, let's say my company bought these by the thousands. If the supplier doesn't know their own carbon footprint, which today very few do.
Of course,
I've got to turn around and say, okay, how do I look at this problem? And I can look at the supplier and say, they take all their production, they give me a carbon footprint report for the whole company. What percentage of their volume of bottles did I buy? Do I just take that as a number, or do I try to reverse engineer how glass bottles are produced, right? This is an incredible challenge facing modern society as we try to do carbon accounting. It's much more complex than even accounting, Accounting, at least you have a price that hides everything that happened before you bought that.
Yeah. Well, moreover, I think in accounting you have standards and
Yes.
foundational templates, for lack of a better term.
Yep.
This is all brand new. So how do you rectify the differences in the products between your suppliers who may be calculating their carbon footprint differently?
Well, and in fact, to date, right, most of the vendors in these various ecosystems have come to realize that the data is not good enough to compare products.
Yeah.
Like if I have two suppliers of these bottles, right, I would need a lot of data to tell you one's better than the other
course.
in a reliable way.
Uh-huh.
But this is where the intelligence community comes in. How do we create data standards, data exchanges that force, as more and more suppliers and more procurement people want to make use of this data and basically incorporate it into their own operational footprint, right, these standards will become critical.
The consistency factor is absolutely
huge.
critical, because without it, then one part of your supply chain that's not in sync, it blows the entire equation out of the water.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the data exchanges, I think, are going to become, what'll happen is let's say that I there's a part of my supply chain I know very well, there's a part I don't know very well, but I need to account for all of it when I make estimates. As time goes on, those things that are not accounted for, as they become accounted for, I need systems that allow me to insert better and better numbers into the models as I go. It needs to be able you need to be able to operate on the plane in flight.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I think this is a major challenge for the intelligence community.
So when you have this many suppliers with unknown variables in the supply chain from a carbon standpoint, and you're trying to make an aggregate of this to determine your footprint as a producer of a computer, for example, certainly the challenges. Now magnify that by the thousands of companies, millions of companies, to try to get an overall footprint, and then you have the challenges, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming this is the case, the challenges from what the US is doing versus other countries around the world, because they're going to be looking at things. Is there a standardization footprint that's being established, just like in the Wi-Fi community or certain formats, that are standardized?
Yeah. What we find is, so HP Enterprise deals a lot with global companies.
Yeah, of course.
So the only thing regions mean to our customers is simply how they report the stuff they do as a core.
Yeah.
So if you're like a global company, say a consumer packaged goods company, and you've got factories and data centers and stuff in all parts of the world, you're going to have your own standards. Yeah. And then what you're trying to figure out is the difference between what the EU requires you to report versus what the US or Canada. Yeah. It just affects how you produce your output. Yeah. But in the end, they have their own core internal standards. And I think what's been missing in the carbon world is this generally accepted accounting principle type equivalent at the level of specificity, so that everybody does it the same.
Right.
Greenhouse gas protocols exist.
Yeah, but it's different still.
They're a little vague, exactly.
So okay, major challenges, obviously, but at the end net result can be highly rewarding across the board, of course.
Very much so.
Especially when you attach, like you had shown before in the previous conversation, when you attach the revenue component that you're looking at from this sort of standardization and the carbon footprint aspect, it's in the trillions of dollars.
Yeah. The companies who have these made commitments, my company's made a commitment, many large corporations have made commitments. Only within the next year or two, they will force all their suppliers to have a commitment. Yeah. At some point, you won't do business if you don't have a commitment. So regardless, what's the good news here, I guess good news if you're into reducing carbon emissions, is that there's a carbon tax. Yeah. And the carbon tax results from everybody's got to have a commitment to do business. It's not legislated. What's legislated is how you're allowed to meet your commitment.
How can you apply it too?
Yeah, right. You don't have to have a commitment. Of course, good luck doing business without one here in the near future, but you are regulated on how you can report your results. So
there's two advantages: the financial advantage of doing this, as well as the fact that you're doing something good for the planet.
Exactly. Well,
and that's the bottom line. I mean, that's where companies are really going to look at and say, why are you not helping out in that context? Right?
That is the innovation. Yeah. I think that's the part. So the intelligence community has a major challenge in getting the data system set up to make this work. Yeah. And then the business community has a major challenge we're focusing on this in terms of how we deal with our IT customers. How do I make it so that I am helping them with an OpEx problem the same time I'm helping them with this carbon emissions problem?
Yeah.
And honestly, they go hand in hand. And as time goes on and some of the technologies that are low carbon mature, it becomes easier for everybody to do that. But the innovation for us is don't just solve the carbon emissions problem, make their business better.
Yes, exactly right. That's the end result as it is. So from an intelligence standpoint, you know, that you mentioned about the necessary application of intelligence around the data collection and the standardization. What about the role of AI? Could AI speed this process up at all? Can AI be
It's a great question.
a component here?
I think looking for patterns.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking.
The big problem is you know, I get caught up a lot in we'll call them sustainability discussions. And most of these discussions, and especially when you're talking about, you know, public marketing type things, it's all about random acts of goodness, I'll call it. And random acts of goodness are great, but we all know, you know, it's what you do every day that's going to have an impact on the planet.
Consistency.
Exactly. It's not this example of something cool or that example, it's scale. And where AI can help us, I believe, is understanding patterns at scale.
Yeah.
What are things that, especially when it comes time to looking for relationships that are not obvious. Like if I have an outcome that's related to emissions or related to energy consumption, and then I've got a lot of data about what affects that outcome, I can use statistics, machine learning, AI to uncover the patterns that most closely explain that outcome.
Right. That would go bypassed if you were looking at it in traditional means.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that signal detection, I think, is one of the areas where, at scale, kind of trying to drive improvements to how we operate as a world.
Yeah.
At scale.
Yeah.
Looking for patterns.
Very, very interesting. So within a SCIP environment, with the intelligence ecosystem, as we always talk about, there's a lot of connection points. I mean, there's a lot of folks in here talking about AI and the future's intelligence and applications areas in there. There's great folks that are talking about the recycling elements around intelligence, the circular economy, the renewables side of the business. This all plays a part within this whole carbon footprint aspect to you know, obviously improve the situation as well as to make the place you know, the betterment of people and planet, as we say in the SCIP world, right?
Yes.
Going forward, what's the you know, if you had some advice for the viewers here, how would you look at this from a next steps perspective? What can the folks who are looking at this conversation here think about? Well, you know what can I do to get involved? How can I get to make a difference in that respect?
Wow, you know, so I would look into this area called life cycle assessment, life cycle analysis, LCA it's called.
Yeah.
Whether you want to be a layperson who just has familiarity with it, the intelligence contribution to what we call carbon footprint in the life cycle assessment is going to be incredibly high scale. This is the challenge of a lifetime, in my opinion, for intelligence community. Because when people do things that might improve energy and emissions in their processes, they frequently don't want their customers to know exactly what they were. They regard them as intellectual property.
Yes.
Very, very similar to the nonlinear challenges of competitive intelligence. How do I peek around the edges at this elephant and figure out what it's shaped
especially
like?
if it's a cost reducer or, you know, something like that. You don't want to reveal that to everybody because it's part of the crown jewels, so to speak.
But I think what makes this more of a challenge now is, yes, I can you know, I don't have eyes. I can find out, okay, this must be an elephant, right? But now with the carbon footprinting side of things, I need to not just know it was an elephant, but I need to try and infer, you know, how many gallons of blood are flowing from its heart, and I need to know what's inside it and how it works too, and I need to infer that from the outside looking in, and then I need a way to capture and model in essence the explanation for that system, and that goes way beyond, I think, a lot of what we've tried to do with information systems today.
So it's the sharing of some of this, what we traditionally call, I'm putting in quotes here, the proprietary information, so to speak, from these individuals. The sharing of that would benefit the overall community because
Yes.
not only is established standardization, but it's best practices, use cases, and all that kind of stuff, right? Sort of like what SCIP tries to do.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
so we can actually, in all honesty, bring some of that content more into the SCIP community as we do more and more of these events. There could be, a directional improvement from that standpoint. It's not going to obviously boil the ocean, but it's at least a step in the right
Well,
direction.
it's kind of strange you say that, because I was thinking to myself, there aren't many examples. The way Agile works in the world is I don't take hardest job first. And to be honest with you, I'll give you an example of someone who took hardest job first. That was Google. Right? Google said, and I'm reading from the lore of the book that was written, right, about how the company was started. But I don't want to just start by solving I don't just want a minimum viable product.
Yeah.
There's a value proposition I'm trying to capture, and I want to make sure I can get I can digest that whole problem at once.
Yeah.
And I honestly think that some problems call out for that, not shortest job first,
Really?
not MVP.
Very big transformational shift, pendulum swing all the way to the other side,
A
right?
broad enabler and scale.
Wow.
And I think that's the call out here is, how do I create a modeling mindset and methodology for partial data, for reverse engineered data, for data that I might have to infer from multiple sources, but to bring it together so that it can take on meaning as a unit.
At scale, like you're saying.
Right, from diverse paths to get there.
Do you think that's, just inherently listening to that, man, I'm scared. As a supplier in the business, I'd be scared to put all of my chips in that one basket, so to speak, right?
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
And how do you overcome that, though? You have to stress the rewards out of it, obviously,
We
right?
do. Well, so one attempt that, like say, IT and communications vendors put into solving the problem. They've come across the fact that every one of our procurement customers has asked us for like carbon footprint data. And then we know, and our competitors know, that comparing products like this based on such partial data is not good. It's fraught with problems. So we created like the product attribute impact assessment methodology.
Yep.
It says if I don't know much about a laptop, for example, my company has 50,000 laptops, I can tell you how many are 17-inch screens, how many are 50. There's only a few attributes I know.
Criteria that's established, right?
So exactly. So if those attributes have some cause and effect that I can tie back to estimating their carbon footprint, that's something the industry.
There's some standardization there.
Exactly. So we got together and we said, let's come up with a common methodology for some of these processes, just so that we don't leave it to chance. That people do something really dumb.
And you're proactive in that case, because now that you have it, they can go on to somebody else who doesn't, and leave your sandbox alone, so to speak.
But now imagine how many topics lend themselves to the need for such a standards body. It's endless number.
Of course, challenges. Wow, great conversation. There's so much I think that is dependent on this. At the same time, I'm in awe of the scope of what your challenges are on a global basis for Hewlett Packard Enterprise. Amazing. Well, this has been great. I really appreciate this conversation, and you've been a huge supporter of SCIP over the years. You're on our board of advisors, which I really appreciate that. You've been a great asset, and I want to thank you for that. And thank you very much for joining us on this iStream episode.
Thank you so much, Paul. SCIP is, I think, a major asset going forward in this problem space.
Outstanding. Thank you for that. Take care. Thanks.